Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer 7801 series double acting floor pivot sets. The example that I'll have in this video is the 652 color, or satin chrome is what it's known as. So it'd be a 7801-652. And I've installed these before. I've machined doors for these in the past, and would like to relay my experience to you. So in the link, there's a link above this video to template, and then to the instructions. And the instructions in the template they're pretty much the same thing, except that the instructions give step 1 through step 6 on how to go about installing this material. Step 1 is going to show you that you've got to achieve a radius on the style of the door, and the radius that it calls out for is an 1.5 inch radius to radius the edge of your wood door. The reason you have to radius it, and think of the top row of tile in your bathroom with that curve, that's called a bullnose, except that it becomes a radius when you do the entire edge of the door. You have to have a radius on the door because the axis of pivoting of the pivot, the center, the vertical axis of pivoting is through the center of the door. And if you want the door as close to the jamb as possible, all right, if you don't radius by taking off the edges off of the door, if my fist was the door, you could imagine that when you tried to open the door, the corner of the door would hit the jamb. So if you radiused it, you'll be able to achieve a tighter margin between the edge of the door and the frame. The template calls out in step 2 that could be a 1/4 inch. In my experience, it could be less. I'm not sure if the 1.5 inch radius and the 1/4 inch gap are directly related in terms of them being hard figures. When I've machined doors for these, I've had a radius larger than 1.5 inch. And I know that I was able to achieve a gap closer to 1/8 of an inch, so it's more standard with what gaps are on commercial wood doors and wood frames, or commercial wood doors and steel frames, or commercial steel doors and steel frames. The going about getting an 1.5 inch radius on the edge of the door is easy, but you need tools to do it. You would need to have a router. You would need to have a large cove bit, like a large one, a gigantic cove bit. And you'd install that, and then a guide, and you'd have to, well, there'd be a bearing on the cove bit. And then also keep in mind that if you're doing this to a door, a wood door that has a veneer, or any sort of veneered sort of construction, when you take the edge of the door, if my fist is still the door, and you take off this portion, and this is the veneer, the top of the back of my hand, you're going to be exposing larger areas of the veneer of the door, so you're going to see the different layers of that. It's a minute detail that I don't think a lot of people think of, but after you've machined this door, you'll be able to see that if you have a veneered door construction. For instance, if you had a cherry veneer door, which architectural wood doors would be veneer, of course, and it was a cherry face or a walnut face, or any sort of veneer, as you bullnose that over, you're going to see the cross banding that the veneer is put down to. You're going to expose that as well. And typically, door veneers could have 2-ply or 3-ply sort of construction on the plywood that goes into making the face of the door. So, just my experience there. Wanted to relay that to you. The instructions do not call out for putting a radius on the opposite style of the door, which means, pardon me, the gap between that edge of the door and your jamb will have to be large. I don't know what it is exactly, because I've forgotten, but it'll be 3/8 of an inch for sure. Unless, of course, if you're going to radius, you could radius the other style as well, and then allowing yourself to achieve a tighter margin. So if you had a 36-inch wide cased opening wood frame, you could get a door into it that would be closer to 35 3/4, if you could get your margins down to 1/8 of an inch, your gaps down between the door and the jamb on each side by radiusing it. Okay, so we've covered that in length, in detail. This is the assembly this is the top pivot. This is the assembly that goes to the top of the door and to the head. It's two parts. Okay. This is the frame portion. This is what you would mortise to the frame. You would drill a hole into the door appropriate for this stud. This is the part with a bushing that goes into the top of the door. When I've done this in the past, I've used the template says 1 inch, a 1 inch diameter hole. I've used a Forstner bit, and I have, per the template, I'll hold it up here, in these 3 points, these 3 intersections, 1, 2, 3, I've taken my Forstner bit and I've just drilled 3 holes very shallow. It says 5/32, so that's extremely shallow, just over 1/8 of an inch. And I really didn't have to do any machining after that because my Forstner bit with the bottom end cleared it all out for me. Same in the head as well. And the instructions template give you dimensions for where to do all that at. Also, I see the note here that this pivot is for doors that are 1 3/8 through 1 3/4 thickness. If you have a thickness of door smaller than 1 3/8, you're going to have trouble just simply fitting the hardware to the door. If you have a door that's thicker than 1 3/4, that's going to be related to your radius, and your margin. You're going to have to allow a greater margin because you have a thicker door. Step 3 down here shows how to cut the bottom of the door. It's actually very simple. Well, it's not simple to do as much as it is kind of easy to understand. You have to cut this. You have to cut a notch into the bottom of the door, per the drawing here, and then up on the heel edge of the door as well, per the dimensions. The heel is covered up by the heel plate that you see here. As you can see, that's radiused. So 1.5 inch radius, that's what that looks like. So this will go on the bottom edge of the stile of the door, on the edge, to cover where you're going to make the cutout in the edge of the door over here for the bottom pivot assembly, which is this. So per the template, you're cutting out a notch for this entire assembly and then a small amount in the edge of the door for this plate. You then, on the bottom of the door, have to mortise a small amount for this mounting tab so that this is flush with the bottom of the door. That's what your bottom assembly looks like. It's too, well, I suppose I can do it a little bit. You can see that the spring goes under tension when I rotate that. The 7801 is intended for light doors. This would be the lightest duty that you would find by Bommer, for doors up to 35 pounds. My great-grandparents had this installed in their door between the kitchen and the dining room, and it lasted for decades, and it's probably still there now. Just lasted for decades. This is one thing to note of the 7801 series is that the spring tension is non-adjustable. You cannot modify the spring tension at all, so that it's important that you're using this within the guidelines of what it's engineered for, your 35-pound door weight. The other feature of this is that it's a hold open at approximately 85 degrees. I can't rotate this by hand. It would be impossible for me to do that. But what happens is there is a bird's mouth, so to speak, cut out in one of the machining of this steel piece, that when you get the door open to about 85 degrees, it's going to seat. It's going to seat into an area that will allow the door to be held open, and it would require very little pressure or force to remove it from the hold open position. Step 4, install it to the bottom of the door. Step 5 shows you how to actually get the entire door into the opening. Insert the top pivot into the top plate. So you'll have the frame portion installed. you'll have the door portion installed, and you're going to mate the two of them. And then you're going to swing the door into place as it's shown here. Critical that the installation be plumb. It has to be plumb, or it's just not going to work very well. It has to be plumb. It's obvious. Screws are included for everything. For the top plate, the heel plate, attaching the body not only to the door, or the business end of this, not only to the door, but to the floor as well. Then the final matter is the attaching of the floor plates. And they both, there's two of them obviously, and they both look like this. Okay. This wraps around to the heel edge so that it mates up very well with what you've got here. Okay. There's a screw for here holding it to the assembly that goes to the bottom of the door. This has to be punched out, obviously, to allow the inner workings of the pivot assembly to do what they have to do. And that is up to step 6. If you have any questions about the Bommer 7801 or any other Bommer double-acting floor pivot or Bommer hardware in general, please feel free to reach out to us. Again, my name is Rich Howard, and thank you very much.